It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
Hi there, and welcome to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. Thanks so much for joining us. And of course, thank you to our sponsor of Sweetser Behavioral Health. And I got to tell you, they are doing so much good work in our communities. This is a good topic today because if you have ever found yourself watching your child wondering, is this normal? Or should I be paying closer attention to this? You're not alone. A lot of parents have questions about milestones or speech or social skills. Maybe it's motor development and what it means when something just feels a little off. Today, we're talking about developmental delays in children, how to spot those early signs, what early intervention actually means, and what support can look like for families. Our guest is Jen Wirt. She is the founder of Coral Care, which provides in-home therapy for kids with developmental delays, and she has a personal story and a real connection with this topic. We're going to cover some age-appropriate milestones in general ways, what parents should bring up with a pediatrician, and how getting help early can really make a difference. So if this topic has been on your mind, you're in the right place. Let's check it out.
Jen, I am so glad to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. For any of our listeners who may not be familiar, just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are in your parenting journey.
Yeah, I'm Jen. I have two daughters, a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, second and third grade. So I am in the phase where we're equipment free, no strollers, no bulky car seats, but still in the thick of it, I guess.
You are in the thick of it. That's an interesting way to put it. I've never heard of that we're equipment free, but that does make such a difference, right? Like that is sort of a life-changing transition when you don't have all the strollers and all the bags and all the things. So I like the way you put that. I want to talk a little bit about your company and what you do. And there's a personal connection that you have when it comes to creating your company. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm the founder and CEO of Coral Care. We're a platform for parents to be able to access speech, occupational, and physical therapy. Our clinicians come to your house every single week for an evaluation and then ongoing care, and it's covered by insurance. I started it because with my older daughter, who I mentioned is 9, when she was a baby, I, like so many parents, was tracking all of the milestones. When they're little, they don't do that much. And so you're really eager for them to kind of do their next trick. And she was having a really hard time first with tummy time, struggling, rolling over, like all of the gross motor milestones, she was just consistently missing. And the months passed and she just wasn't progressing. And so we tried to get help, pursue different programs, and just were met with like every possible obstacle in the way to actually get her care. And so what should have been get her into physical therapy, get her some help, she moves forward, turned into a multi-year process that was very stressful, cost more money than we really had to spend, and showed me kind of a view into a world that a lot of parents deal with in kind of various times. And I just became very motivated to fix this.
Yeah. And there's probably a lot of parents listening that can relate to that experience as well. And, we talked about a little bit about like New Year, maybe this is a good time to sort of have a natural checkpoint for families, right? Why is this a good moment to sort of pause and assess where you are with your kids?
Well, so every moment is technically a good moment to do that. I think at the start of the year, it's a great time because, as we take these moments to think about our own health and like being proactive about things, like that's often what this is for your child. With all of first of all, there's nothing wrong with your child. Like, there's nothing wrong with having a child that has additional needs, whether it be in the early infant stage, missing milestones, or like later on kind of struggling with different things. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't do anything wrong. And the best thing you can do is get answers and get help. So as we think about the start of the year, for a lot of us with kids in school, they're navigating their way off of break and back into the day-to-day in the classroom. And there's this heightened sense of everything at the start of the year. And so a lot of the things that we see feel bigger. And so it's just a great moment to check in with like, do I have a gut feeling that this is something more? If I look at the milestone charts, like where does my child fit? Not that it's like pass fail necessarily, but like how is my child doing? And would it help all of us, both me and my child, if we got an expert opinion and got some help?
And I think you said something that I think is really important, that gut check, right? Because all of us as parents, we have that gut feeling sometimes when things are not right. I also think just, and the experience that you described with your now 9-year-old is just this idea of it's very natural for parents to worry, right? And it's okay to also normalize that worry around developmental milestones. That's a very natural thing for us as parents to do, especially when you're talking about your first child. But, when a parent might hear developmental delay, or they've got that gut feeling that maybe there is a developmental delay, what do you want them to understand about that?
So sometimes there is something underlying going on. A diagnosis, like sometimes there is something going on. There are other times where your child kind of just needs an assist, is how I would describe it, or needs to almost be course corrected. Like in the case of my daughter, there was nothing like medically wrong with her. And so when we went to orthopedists, we kind of pursued the more medical path with like doctors. There was nothing wrong. But as the parent, I saw every other kid is sitting and crawling and pulling to a stand and taking their first steps. And my daughter is the cutest little lump on the ground and is not doing any of that. And so I can hear everyone saying to me, like, there's nothing wrong, she's going to be fine. But like, I knew that there was something. And so when there was, you hear there's nothing wrong and you're grateful for that, but you want the help to help your child along. And so in her case, because it took so long to get help, she developed bad habits.
Oh,
Kids are amazing and they're going to figure out how to do things. She wants to get to a certain toy. She wanted to get a snack and she found a pathway to doing that. In her case, she was like scooting and sitting in a funny position, and kids find a way and they will develop bad habits. And the longer you go without somebody coming in and guiding them in the correct way, the harder it is to like veer them back to where they should be. And so when you're, I know we've kind of, in this case, like I've a little bit veered off the question, but when you are seeing and observing your child and you're noticing that something isn't where it should be, you want to think about how like every day does matter and making sure that they are learning to progress in the correct way so they don't develop any bad habits.
It's interesting because what I was thinking about too, as you were sharing that, is I remember with our first, she did not walk like as her primary mode of transportation until I think she was like 16 months old. She would just crawl and she seemed perfectly happy with it. Now, as a first-time mom and seeing all of her peers who started walking right at 12 months or 13 months or maybe even 11 months, I remember like having that underlying worry. And also the doctor would say, they're fine. Some babies don't walk till 18 months. And I was like, that seems really late, right? In this case, right around 16 months, she popped up on her feet and just kind of took off. But, I think that it's very common for parents to have that sort of like worry and fear around what's happening with their child, even when it technically fits within the quote unquote normal developmental milestones. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's why it's like so important to look at the patterns and like going back to kind of trusting your gut there. Like, even though in the case of my daughter, like there wasn't anything necessarily like mechanically wrong with her. She screamed when she was placed on her feet, and like that's not normal. And so there were like seemingly in pain, and so
but that's her way of something's not right, though, too, right?
Yeah, like there was something amiss, and it was that she had an issue with how she was putting pressure on her feet.
Yeah,
and you don't think that like a child has to learn how to place their foot on the ground, but like actually sometimes they do.
Yeah, right. I think as you talk about milestones too, like what is the healthiest way for us as parents to use those milestones, as a guide and not a stress test? Like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong.
It's hard because the milestones are constantly changing and how it's kind of coming out from the CDC and whatnot. And they keep kind of shifting back. But as I mentioned, the problem is that when something is missed and the pattern develops, it's harder to intervene and it takes longer to kind of bring them back along. Milestones are designed to be, as a whole, designed to be like guideposts. There's a range for everything. There's no like perfect score. Oftentimes kids who are behind in one area can be ahead in another. That's very normal. And so they're kind of a range of what to expect. If you're finding that your child is missing a few or misses one, and then the next one in that same category of like fine motor comes along and they miss that one too, that's the right moment to go and seek some help.
So let's talk about you're kind of talking about buckets, right? So like, what are the biggest developmental buckets to think about? Is it, communication or motor or social maybe would be under that, daily living? Like, what are those buckets that we as parents should keep top of mind?
So they're the primary buckets, which do change a little bit depending on the age, are gross motor, which is your big movements. Like think of that in the early days as like crawling, walking, running, jumping. There's fine motor, which also falls into like hand strength. So that could be writing, but it could also be holding a toothbrush, manipulating a button or a zipper on a backpack. All of those things which really use the small muscles in your hand. Then there's social emotional, which we think of feelings, but in the earliest days of the baby, it's actually the smile is the first indicator that like they're socially responding in a way that they should. And then, it does develop. There's also speech, as you mentioned, and communication, which has a progression of like how many words, constructing sentences, things like that. And then there's some additional ones that kind of fall into the other categories, but feeding is the other big one. So like self-feeding, being able to so when we think about a baby feeding themselves, that in itself is a milestone.
Is there like a milestone that you feel might be most misunderstood or puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on parents? Is there one that sticks out?
There's not one that sticks out, but the one that is currently the kind of the hot topic of debate is crawling.
Oh, how so?
There are a lot of people who kind of said, hey, crawling's not a milestone anymore. Kids don't need to crawl. But actually, in our clinical practice, we believe that crawling develops core muscles to help with later things. And so even the kids who skip crawling are kind of brought back into that on-force position to develop core strength, upper body strength, coordination. So crawling has kind of been brought back in.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that crawling had kind of fallen out of favor. Okay. So can we talk about, maybe some general age appropriate milestones? Like if you think, 0 to 12 months, right? Are there a few key things to watch for when it comes to whether communication or social with that smiling?
Yes, I would encourage everyone to go through our developmental guide where we have the nuance of broken out like 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12. So in the first year of a child's life, if I were to just bucket it that way, the child is learning to like explore and interact and move their body. So it really starts with like on the gross motor side, like rolling over, being on their stomach, pushing themselves onto all fours, crawling, pulling themselves to a stand, kind of like rocking back and forth, and then walking, which comes, right after one. In the fine motor, it's reaching for toys. It's kind of an early one also for children. Manipulating the toy, moving a toy from one hand to the other and starting to play in that way. There are some social emotional milestones around play that we talk about a lot. Interacting with an object, knowing, like, for example, a rattle shakes, smiling, as I mentioned. We often encourage kids to play with mirrors when they're babies. They like practice smiling, smile at themselves.
No, it's so cute watching a baby smile at themselves in the mirror.
It's so cute. And then with speaking, it's like babbling and then forming words.
The dada, mama, that kind of thing. So then what would be the next, like, would it be toddler, whether it's, 1 to 2 or, sort of for those younger toddlers, what might be some of the things to watch for?
Yeah. So as they get into the toddler years, it's more confidence in the movements. Mm-hmm. So running, jumping, climbing, like being more adventurous on the playground. Like the playground is like the best place for kids at so many different ages, but in toddlerhood, we really start to see kids develop confidence there. More words. Like it's kind of like the vocabulary develops, more words, stringing words together as a sentence kind of comes in next. Like scribbling, and then like suddenly like more control over the pen, over the crayon, and they can draw on a line. Those are the next stages for a child.
And then when we get a little bit beyond toddler, like maybe that 3 to 5, or even just that sort of preschool moving into kindergarten age, what are some of the key milestones within that group?
When you want your spring break to feel like and your kids' pool day to feel like and your hotel bed to feel like and room service to feel like, because at Hilton, hospitality feels like
your cabana's ready. Would you like fresh towels?
It matters where you stay. Book now at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay.
Yeah, so once they're in preschool, we really look a lot at the things that like we consider to be like kindergarten readiness. And obviously it varies by age. Like there are not expectations on a 3-year-old that you would see on a 5-year-old and whatnot. There's an independence element. So being able to use the bathroom independently, wash their hands independently, zipper their jacket or their backpack, things like that really fall into independent living. Mm-hmm. When we think about the social element, being able to play with another child and share, communicate their needs. So in communication, it's not just having this like beautiful, robust vocabulary. It's being able to advocate for themselves and communicate effectively in that way in a classroom. With the fine motor skills, it's everything that's going to lead to writing so that they can do it so that they don't fatigue when they write, so that they have like the hand strength to be able to use scissors and cut in a straight line, and so that they can develop the skills that they'll need once they get into kindergarten. And then there's also the ability to like sit, follow multi-step directions. Multi-step directions is a big one. So it's like not just go put the marker in the bin. It's go put the marker in the bin and then grab a piece of paper and then come sit down. So it's like a string of tasks that a child will need to do.
From what I understand, like speech delays are really one of the biggest worries for families. And it's a common one as well. So are there some early speech or language signs that maybe you're at home and you're observing with your little one that really deserve like a closer look? Like what is that trigger point that when it comes to speech, maybe they need a little assistance?
Yeah, well, the reason we hear about speech the most is because like we know what speech is supposed to sound like. And so it's easiest for us, generally speaking, to say, hey, this isn't normal. I like to say the biggest thing with your child is that if you are translating what your child is saying, like if you are the only person that understands what your child is saying, then your child would benefit from speech therapy. So there's the articulation things, like are they pronouncing the words correctly? Can they form the words correctly? There's that piece of it. There's also the ability to like get words out. And it could be a stutter. It could be that they're struggling. They like know the words, but they can't say them. And that happens a lot with children. And those kids get really frustrated. And oftentimes it can look like there's a behavioral thing going on. There still might be something else going on there, but oftentimes like a child who is struggling to get their words out is going to feel like so frustrated in how they communicate. And you'll see like behavioral things going on there. But oftentimes the underlying element is they could use a little help in speech.
Yeah. Well, and behavioral also kind of lends to sort of the social aspect too, which, it seems like social is a little bit harder to interpret, right? Because everybody kind of develops that at a different pace. But what might be some of the early social signs that parents should kind of take notice of?
I think there are a lot of them. There's the can't sit still. And not to say like a 3-year-old does not need to sit still for a long time. Like that is totally reasonable that a child is on the move all the time, but really not being able to sit still and focus on something. So if you give them an activity that they enjoy and they're constantly moving on to the next one and they can't even be in the moment with that one activity for a second, that might be totally age appropriate, but that also might justify like having some occupational therapy. Frequent outbursts, getting frustrated often and melting down. Like, again, these are all things that are like, that's just being 3, that's just being 4. And yes, but if it's happening often, your child could need some support, and likely you need some support because that's really challenging when
it's
your child
hard. And maybe that's when the gut check comes in too, a little bit more there. And I know part of it is there are sensory related issue. Like, how can you tell if it's a communication issue or maybe there's like a sensory issue that might need to take a closer look at? And it's not bad behavior. Like, child has a sensory issue. Like, how can you tell?
I think there are different types of sensory issues, and there are the ones that we see visibly more often. A child who struggles with bright lights and loud noises. It might need like you see a lot of kids when you're out and about with the headphones on. Those are, how a child is reacting to like external sensory elements. There's also kind of the other side of it is like their internal side. And so for some kids, having a sensory input helps them to regulate.
Like, what do you mean? What does that mean?
I'll give an example. My 7-year-old, after a really long day, struggles to focus, and understandably, and that her inability to focus like gets her very dysregulated. And so she needs like an oral sensory input. And so we would catch her chewing her tongue, chewing her clothes, like all of her clothes were all bunched up around her neck, and soaking wet. And so her occupational therapist said, give her some gum. And she's 7. I'll say this. I'm not saying give gum to young children, but said, give her some gum to do her homework and put her on a balance cushion on her chair. So she gets a little bit of the wiggle movement and she's chewing, and that oral sensory input calms her brain and allows her to really organize her thoughts to be able to focus. Okay. The thing is, like, it's not our job as parents to know this, right? Like, we don't know these things. And it's not our job as parents to understand when our child is dysregulated and thus needs a specific sensory input. And I didn't come up with these solutions independently. Like, my daughter works with an occupational therapist. And so that's how I've been able to support that. And I think that's the other big thing as a parent. Like, you don't need to diagnose your child and you don't need to cure, if it's not really the right word, but you don't need to solve all of their problems yourself.
That's and just giving yourself a little grace, right? Like, as parents, I mean, you and I are both working parents. Like, there's and you know what, I when we talked earlier, you described it as like after school is transactional, or dinner time is transactional. It's like, okay, this is the time for dinner. Okay, this is time for getting ready or taking a shower or putting your backpack together or doing your homework. Like, everything has its place. And that's so true. So then when you've got that gut check of, oh my gosh, plus is there something wrong? Like, that it's a lot. It is a lot. I mean, I don't need to tell you that or anybody who is listening to this, it can be a lot. So I think it's just a reminder, like give yourself some grace. And that is what help is for, right? Yeah. You mentioned a couple of sensory things too, like your daughter would chew her shirt or, have trouble sort of staying still, kind of fidgety, which is, it seems, I mean, obviously that's very common. What are some of the other sensory things that parents might not realize are meaningful?
Mhm.
I can think of a couple of kids who I've seen chew on their shirt. Is that meaningful? Is that something to say, hey, let's have a conversation with a professional?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So anytime that you're seeing, it's so interesting, even with my own daughter, even though I work, like this is my company, I know this space so well. When she had her mouth open and was like chewing on things and mouth breathing during all of these activities, my first thought was to go to the ENT. Like, is there something wrong with her nose? Can she not breathe? And it was that she was like seeking this regulation. And, I'm neurotic and I had it checked out. And so I made sure everything was okay. But I think one thing for me that was sensory that was a surprise for me was not all movement is equal. And so the example that I like to give is back and forth or up and down motion elicits a different response from a child than when they're spinning, than like a vestibular motion. And so for my daughter, like when she comes home and needs to release and regulate, jumping on a trampoline is really great. Having the input in her feet, bouncing up and down, or going on the swings and actually just going in the forward back motion is very regulating for her. Now, if she takes that same spin and that same swing and spins around really fast, she loves it, but it makes her have like almost like she's bouncing off the wall. And it's so hard to like pull her back in and get her back on track. And that's actually another thing that like our occupational therapist taught us is that like be like thoughtful about the movement that they're doing and monitor like how your child responds to it.
Well, and also, bring in professionals. So that's what they're just out of curiosity too, like if autism is a concern for a family, what might be some early patterns that families could notice without jumping to conclusions, right?
Yeah.
What might those look like?
Yeah. So first, let me say that our practice of speech, occupational, and physical therapists, we do not diagnose autism. We will always, if that is a concern, we'll send to the pediatrician and to go and get a diagnosis. That being said, there's a lot of oftentimes overlap in some of the categories that we talked about, like speech concerns, sensory, behavioral, where we support kids both with an autism diagnosis and without an autism diagnosis who kind of exhibit similar things. It's the same thing that I would say with early delays. Looking at the child development milestones. If your child is not meeting those, there could, as I mentioned, there could be an underlying thing, and that underlying thing could be autism.
Yeah.
But it also could not be.
Right. So going back to, seeking the experts in when it comes to that. So that, how do you help parents decide between, all right, let's just keep an eye on this versus, okay, we do need to go get an evaluation now?
So we always encourage parents to get the evaluation. And I think the reason why the evaluation is so important is because it's a chance for a clinician, somebody who is trained in the specialty, to ingest what you are saying as the parent. You see so many things that there's no way anyone is going to see in 1 hour with your child. And that is totally understood. And so understanding what the parent sees, what the patterns are, not just what the parent sees today, but what happened last month, what was happening before, were there external factors that could have driven to this? Were you traveling? Was it out of the norm? And piecing together the full story. Then the clinician will also, if there's anything from the teacher that's provided, that all goes into the evaluation as well. But then the clinician works off a very standardized set of play-based activities that they can engage with the child and observe different things and put together a picture of what's going on. Would this child benefit from waiting? Is this somebody where like, hey, let's give it another month and check in again? Is this a child who maybe only needs like 6 to 8 weeks of speech therapy and the family has the toolkit, the child is in good shape, they're good to go? Or maybe needs a little bit longer. But you're not going to know unless you invest in that closer look. And that's the challenge. And you can talk, if somebody's only seeing one piece of it, whether it be the child without the parent conversation, in the case of a teacher who might see something and say something, or if they're only hearing from the parent, it's really hard to know how to guide the family.
It's when in doubt, check it out, is what I'm hearing you say.
I mean, that's how I feel about everything, because it's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You know more information and you're better equipped to support your child. And like, if it's that, hey, this can wait, like that's really good to know as well.
Well, and you alluded to it a little bit, when we first started the conversation, that early intervention can make a difference, right? Like, what changes when support is put into place earlier than later?
Kids are, you hear this all the time. Kids are like sponges. So the brain is developing so quickly. And so the sooner that you can work with the child, the easier it is to set them up to have the right skills, approach things in a way that's easier for them and more guiding to develop, the way that they need to, than it is to course correct. Even with ourselves, like I think of some of my habits and I'm like, I don't know how I would undo those, after so long. And it's similar with kids. When a child, like the example of, W, kids who sit in the W where their legs kind of pop out from the knee, that's a really hard one to correct if a child has been sitting in that position for a very long time.
How interesting.
And it's really important because it impacts their core strength. It impacts their ability to move around. And it's a position kids get comfortable in oftentimes when they're transitioning between like sitting and standing, because they can get that extra boost and reach and grab something from further away. But it impacts their hips. And as I mentioned, their core. And so if a child has been doing that without any intervention for a very long time, it's hard to get them out of that out of a position that they've grown comfortable in.
You're talking about when like the knees.
When you always see it. It's
which sounds so painful to actually sit like that at this age.
My adult body cannot do that.
No, thank you. But that's interesting. Jen, if there was one takeaway for parents listening to this right now, whether they, maybe they do have that gut feel, they're not sure what it is, but they have that gut feeling that maybe something's not quite right. What would that be?
I would say the biggest takeaway is you are your child's best advocate. And so go, if you have any gut feeling, if you're not sure, if you just need that like go, no go type moment, pursue an evaluation, because the longer you wait, it's just the longer it could take to fix.
Yeah.
Or it could take to kind of set your child up for success.
Adjust yourself for, because, I hate when I said something's not quite right, like that stuck with me because it's not that they're not right.
I know. And I hate to say like fix.
Right. And no, I hear you.
Yeah.
It's just, how do we set them up for success or help them not that you can't succeed if you're sitting in a W, but it is hard. Like, listen to us even just like trying to, analyze what we're saying. Like it's tough for parents, and the amount of guilt and worry and all the things that come along with it. It's like, I think also just underlining that with, again, give yourself a little grace, right? Yeah. We're all doing the best we can.
Exactly. And even if I love my children's pediatrician, I trust her so much, but even if your pediatrician is saying you could wait, you don't have to. You can go get an evaluation and that's okay.
Yeah.
And so trust yourself there.
Yeah. Well, Jen, thank you so much. I want to mention too, we'll have more resources on our website, which is wgme.com/raisingme. Just such a pleasure. Really appreciate your insight here, Jen.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, a big thank you to Jen. Certainly appreciate her expertise and her time and her guidance today, and just a few takeaways that really stood out for me. First, I think, just knowing that milestones are guides. This is not a judgment. And if you are concerned, it is okay to ask questions and really try to get a clearer picture. Also, early support helps. You don't have to just wait it out, right? Like if your gut is telling you something's worth exploring, please ask those questions and start exploring. And you're not alone. There are so many resources and really great professionals who can help families build those skills at home and in daily life. Thank you so much for listening to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode was edited by Megan Littlefield with production assistance from Clarissa Paulson. Please follow Raising Me wherever you get your podcasts and consider a positive rating and review, which helps others to find this message. Also, a big thank you to Sweetser Behavioral Health, one of our sponsors here. We always appreciate them. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.